Hi, everyone. My name is Janelle Bitker. I'm a food reporter with the San Francisco Chronicle, and you are here today for a summer baking demo with Raquel Goldman of Norte 54 Bakery in San Francisco. Our goal with these live streamed events is to provide our readers another way to connect with all of the voices at the Chronicle. And you can always find these events in the future at sfchronicle.com/membership. This event is co-produced with CUESA, which puts on the amazing farmers market at the Ferry Plaza, as well as the Thursday Mission Community Market, which is one of the places you can find Raquel's modern Mexican pastries. And we have Bree joining us to tell us a little bit more about the partnership.
Great. Thank you so much, Janelle. And thank you to everyone who's joining us this evening. As Janelle mentioned, I'm Bree. I'm with CUESA, which is the Center for Urban Education about Sustainable Agriculture, and we're the nonprofit that operates the Ferry Plaza Farmers Market 3 days a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, and Mission Community Market on Thursdays, as well as food education programs for eaters of all ages. And we are so thrilled to partner with the Chronicle for events like this one. At CUESA, we're all about supporting local farms and local food and local journalism. So thank you so much for being a San Francisco Chronicle subscriber. And we're so grateful for the Chronicle's excellent in-depth coverage of our local food community and farmers markets. Pre-pandemic, we co-hosted in-person tours with the Chronicle at the farmers market, but we've been really delighted to pivot to online demos to connect Chronicle subscribers like you more intimately with the farmers and food makers in our market community. So hopefully we'll be able to do in-person events in the future, but you can visit us at the farmers market in the meantime. It's peak season, peak summer at the farmers market right now with tomatoes and peppers and corn, eggplant, berries, stone fruit, which you'll hear more about from Raquel soon. And I just also want to say that I'm so excited to see this demo with Raquel. Raquel joined the farmers market at the Mission location last year. She's also joined us at the Ferry Plaza Farmers Market on Tuesday, bringing her delicious seasonal pan dulce using farmers market produce. So come and support her at the Ferry Plaza on Tuesdays and Mission Community Market on Thursdays. You can also support our other farmers and food makers and learn more at CUESA.org. So again, thank you all. I'll pass it back to Janelle and Raquel, and yeah, I'll see you later. Thanks.
Thanks, Bree. So Raquel, your bakery is fairly new. It's entirely possible some of our dear subscribers are unfamiliar. Could you walk us through how you got started and what your inspiration is?
Yes. So I got started kind of at the beginning of COVID. COVID shut down the restaurant I was working at the time, so we were all let go. And I think from March to August, I was at home with my family, managing Zoom school and all of the new challenges that COVID presented. But I also found myself kind of wondering what my next steps were going to be and whether or not I'd be able to return to the restaurant at any time. But in the meantime, I wanted to kind of just start playing around with Mexican baked goods, mostly it was born out of curiosity, really, and this sort of desire to not reinvent, but make what I remember from my childhood better. And so I just started to play around over the summer. And then at some point I had enough experience with what I was making that I felt like, okay, maybe I should do something with this. And in September of 2020, I started selling pastry boxes, just, online, and I would deliver them over the weekend. And then I kind of wanted to see where else I could take it. So I reached out to CUESA, and specifically the Mission Community Market, because I felt that what I was making would be a good fit for that neighborhood. And CUESA reached out immediately when I sent in my application, which I was happy for and surprised. because it was all happening very fast. But I showed up at the Mission Community Market in October, and I've been at the markets since then. And so I was inspired at first just by like my curiosity for my sort of childhood experience, but then as soon as I was in the market, especially at the Mission, there was this added bonus of being part of this community that I hadn't experienced before. It was really sweet and kind of a way for me to reconnect with this community here in San Francisco.
And your last job was at Nopa, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And you're still connected to the Nopalito fam, right?
That's right. So I am very lucky to be working in the kitchen with the Nopalito crew. I work here in their commissary kitchen very early mornings and sometimes into the day, but it's still within the family that I first began with at the restaurant. So I feel very lucky to be here.
So I know you incorporate local seasonal fruit into quite a few of your treats. Can you walk us through what sort of fruit you're working with right now and how you're using it?
Yeah. So for instance, for today, I'm going to be using stone fruit from K&J Orchards. They're one of my neighbors at the farmers market on Tuesdays, and I frequent them for their whatever they have. Really is always great, but right now they have peaches and pluots and plums, so I tend to either use those in a jam for one of my cakes that I make for the markets called a Garibaldi, and then sometimes they also wind up on the tres leches cake that I make. And then next to them is Yerena Farms, and they make, they grow all kinds of berries, strawberries, blackberries right now, raspberries, and other things as well. But I use their stuff for other pastries. Like also sometimes I'll use the strawberries for jamming and topping the Garibaldis, or I make this really specific cake that's named after Polly, and it's sort of a riff on a childhood snacking cake called a gansito.
So when I go to the farmer's market this time of year, I'm so excited and also so overwhelmed because I want to buy everything, especially at the fruit stands. How do you decide what to work with, and how do you decide the best format for the specific fruit?
We're so lucky. We're so lucky, and I hear you about being overwhelmed with the amount of like the bounty that we have right now, especially these summer months. There was a moment where there was so much fruit coming in that you fear that you'll lose out on the opportunity to work with it. I have like my base sort of cakes or snacking cakes that I can always just continue to swap and put one fruit on the back burner and bring another one out. And I'm at both markets, so I can even swap within the week. So I get a lot of opportunity to play. I can say, okay, on Tuesday, I'm going to do strawberries. On Thursdays, I'm going to switch to the pluots. And then on the weekends as well with my pastry boxes, I can also play around. So I'm lucky enough that I have like a chance to sort of grab from or feature the fruit in different ways.
At the farmer's market I go to right now, the stone fruit stand, I'm always just blown away by the variety of peaches alone. And I had a really great O. Henry peach last weekend that I'm still dreaming about. But how do you decide like which specific varietals among the fruit to choose? Yeah.
Being at the farmer's market, there's something that was new to me this past year was just becoming very friendly with my neighbors, and everyone is very friendly generally. And there's an exchange of goods that happens amongst all the vendors. And so you develop friendships and community that way as well. And So oftentimes K&J will come by and like just leave me, you know, a dandy pluot, and they'll be like, try this, it's great, you know. Or they'll direct me in a way sometimes, and they say, grab the Asian pears this week, or the figs, the candy stripes are in, you know. So there's a lot of education for me happening that way, because I get to be exposed to varieties that I may not have heard of or tasted before. Same thing with Yerena. Sylvia and Polly really do a good job of teaching and educating. So there's all these different varieties of strawberries, and they can be used in different purposes. And so I rely on the farmers explaining, you know, how the fruit's been used before, or the, you know, the flavors that each fruit might have.
And you're not getting totally special treatment, right? Like I assume if I asked for what the best fruit is at that moment, I'm not going to get a similar answer.
Yeah. No, everyone's so friendly, and I think the farmers market provides such a great community. So they're happy to interact with their audience.
Well, I think let's get started on the demo part of this conversation.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to be working on a Mexican-inspired galette, and it's not necessarily a Mexican dessert, but I've incorporated a lot of ingredients that harken to Mexican flavors. So the galette has some masa harina in it. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to shift my camera so that away from me into the bowl so you can see what I'm doing.
Great.
Here we go. Okay. So in this bowl, I'm going to add flour and masa harina, and it's blue masa harina this time. I've been playing around with different, like the varieties, white and yellow, but this, for the demo, I'm using the blue one. And I can go over the amounts. It's 160 grams of all-purpose flour, 30 grams of masa harina, whichever color or that you might have available. 15 grams of sugar are in here as well, 5 grams of salt. And then to this, I'm going to add 12 tablespoons of cold butter. I'm just going to dump all that in there. I'm going to pop this onto my mixer, and we're just going to paddle this till it gets to about that coarse pea-size crumb. I don't know if you've heard that description before, but essentially we want to get that butter incorporated into the flour until it resembles a coarse dough. Let me see if you guys can see in here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you using butter straight from the fridge?
Yes, we want to use cold butter. That's ideal.
And why is it important for it to be cold in this preparation?
You don't want the butter to be warm because then it'll get to, like, it's just not great for the flour to mix in well with the butter. And you want it to be able to stay like sort of separate in pieces. If it was too soft, it would just smush into the flour and become a paste. And you want to keep your butter into like little shards so that when you're finally bringing the dough together, you still have pieces of butter in there so that when it finally bakes, you get that flakiness. That, you know, all pie doughs, you're aiming for flakiness so you get that tender crust. I think we're about there. So if you can see, I'll reach in and grab my hand, and it's sort of shards of butter mixed in with the flour and the dries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And now we'll add our water, which is 2 ounces of water. And again, we're using cold water so that it stays cold and doesn't melt any of our butter. And sometimes, depending on how the dough comes together. You don't need to use the entire amount of water, or sometimes you do need to add more water. But if you get to the point where you see the dough coming together around the paddle, then you're done. It'll pull away from the bowl and become a really solid mess. So I would stop around there. That's not the entire amount of water. I still have some water left.
Mm-hmm.
It was enough to bring my dough together. I'm just gonna take this out. And at this point, we're just gonna take all this dough out and we're gonna put it away. Bring it together into like a ball. Nice disc. So here's my dough. And I'm just gonna smash it up into a disc. And I'm gonna wrap this in plastic wrap and then set it into the fridge for, I would say, an hour. But 30 minutes is doable, but I like to do an hour or so.
Is longer actually better if you have the time?
Yeah, you could leave it in there for a day. If you're going to work on it right away, then I would say an hour is good. But you can do up to 3 days, or you can even freeze this dough and leave it in your freezer until you're ready to use it.
The color is really beautiful.
Yeah, isn't that cool? It's like this. I mean, it's a grayish blue. So that's gonna look cool.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's a bridesmaid's dress color.
yeah. It's very
I'm just curious, if I hypothetically wanted to experiment with incorporating masa into different baked goods, I mean, can I just substitute some flour for masa, or I assume there's much more to it?
Yeah, when I first started to play around with this recipe, I started off with just subbing out about 10% of the flour amount. So if, like, let's say the recipe called for just 100 grams, you could say, okay, I'm going to do 90 grams of all-purpose flour and then 10 grams of masa. And then you can continue to sort of work those numbers until you get to a flavor profile that you like. And that's sort of how I came to the amounts in this recipe.
Does it absorb more water?
Does it absorb more water? It can, yeah. It just depends. So that's why you always got to gauge the water part so you don't get too sticky of a dough.
Right. So you have to know what you're looking for.
Yeah. But if you worked with pie doughs before, it's always, the water component is always sort of, you add it carefully so as not to get a very wet dough, or to make sure your dough comes together enough as well. Right.
It always seems like the trickiest part.
Yeah.
And the Galette Dough, is that basically just the same as a pie dough? Like you could.
It's like a pie dough. Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah. It's nothing fancy. It's just it's almost similar to a pâte brisée, but we're not going as fine as the pâte brisée can be. Sometimes you get into a more sandy texture with those, but I wanted to keep some butter chunks in there so it flake up.
Mm-hmm. I also just want to pause for a moment and say that for subscribers who signed up for this demo, you will get the recipe emailed to you afterward. But if you want to chime in with any questions that you have about what Raquel is doing as she's doing it, feel free to drop those in. Otherwise, we'll address more questions toward the end. So what comes next?
What comes next? Okay, so I've set that aside for now. And I have another pie dough already, or a galette dough already made. So I'm going to roll this out just so that you can see real quick. At every point with the dough, I always, that goes into the cold. Once this is rolled out, I would throw that into the fridge, into the cold again, giving our dough a chance to really cool down and not get too melted. just, we want to always keep our dough cold. So again, I'm going to shift my camera down to my work table. Make sure I have enough room here. I'm just going to lightly flour my table here. And this pie dough, this galette dough is actually with yellow masa. I've been playing around with all the different kinds that Nopa has. And we're just gonna shift and make sure that our dough isn't sticking to the table. Turning it a quarter turn. Trying to keep it as round as possible, but it's okay if it's not because it's a galette, it's rustic. It's sticking now, so I'll add a little bit more flour. Not too much though, just enough so it doesn't stick to my rolling pin, and I can still keep moving it around.
So what would be the danger of not moving it a quarter turn so constantly?
So if we're not moving it around, the butter will definitely start to warm up. The dough will start to warm up and it'll start to stick. And once dough starts to stick to your surface, dough likes to stick to dough. And you'll just start to sort of smear it around instead of keeping it in one solid piece. And it's just it makes
just a disaster, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can so when you're lifting it, when I'm lifting it right now, it just comes off the table, no problem. But if it were to stick, then if I were to lift it, it could break it here and tear, and then you have to patch it up. And I mean, that happens, and you can patch it up for sure, but it's just so much easier to just be careful and turn it and flour it as you go as needed so that you avoid those sticky messes.
So how big of a circle are you going for?
I'm going for this is probably about an 8 to 9 inch dough circle. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about 8 to 9 inches. And what I did before is to make it extra clean, I flipped a bowl on top and I cut around it. But you could also leave it like this if you had, sometimes when you're rolling out pie dough and it doesn't kind of go the way you want it, sometimes you end up with a rectangle or a weirder shape. But I mean, you can always roll with that, or you could cut it to your liking. So I trimmed my other pie dough just because I wanted it to be really, really round and pretty for the demo. So I'm just going to set this guy aside. Whoops. Set this guy aside and grab the other guy.
So how long would you then put it in the fridge?
Again, you could, as you see, I've stored this guy in the fridge in parchment and wrapped it so it doesn't dry out. And you could have your rounds, your galette rounds in the fridge. You can put them in the freezer for a long time, like up to 3 months. If you have a nice sturdy freezer. But you could also stick it in the fridge for a week and it would be happy there. This guy's been sitting out, so it's a little warm, but I'm still going to work with it. So same masa color, yellow masa, and as you can see, it's all trimmed out just for showing you all. So now I'm going to actually work with the fruit because at this point I'm ready to start building it. So I'm going to shift over to my fruit, which is all this delicious stone fruit from K&J Orchards.
Yeah, what exactly do you have?
I have these yellow peaches with believe the name of these yellow peaches are Everday or Everdeen or some. I'm blanking on the name right now. I have dandy pluots, which are, if you've never had a dandy pluot, they're amazing. And then just a regular plum.
Are dandy pluots always that more speckled look?
Yes. And they have this pink flesh on the inside. So I'll show you. They have like this peachy pink, almost like the way pink pearl apples have that pink flesh on the inside. The dandy pluots tend to look that way, but they can vary in color. So it just depends, I think, on the crop.
Yeah, I think I had a dandy pluot last week, and it was a situation just like you described where the farmer was like, you should grab one of these. And I grabbed one without remembering what it was. But how would you describe the flavor of a dandy pluot compared to other pluots?
The dandy pluot flavor, I'd say it's tart, but it's also really sweet. It's very candy-like, and I'm trying to liken it to something. Yeah, and they're crunchy too. But I would say it's like it's not as sweet as like a peach. You know, a peach has like that very sugary taste to it, and dandy pluots have this sort of sweet tartness to them. They're just really wonderful. K&J also makes these. They'll dry the dandy pluots. I don't know if you've ever had those.
I don't think I've had them dried.
They will have them probably later on heading into the fall. And they sell them in little clamshells, and they're so good just as a snack.
That's a good tip.
Yeah, or in your granola.
Oh, that's a beautiful peach.
Yeah, they're gorgeous.
I had these incredible peaches maybe in early July. I wish I wrote down the exact type of peach, but they were a white peach, but when you opened it, the flesh was really pink.
So pretty. And the white peaches have this, I'm always drawn to the aromatics of the peaches. They have this almost rose-like quality to them. A lot of the stone fruit does. So I'm just cutting the fruit into large, sort of half-inch wedges. I'm trying to get that all cut to the same, more or less the same size.
So when you're baking with stone fruit, how important is it to cut the fruit quickly and immediately bake it, as opposed to, say, if I wanted to try to prep ahead of time?
So for instance, for this guy, I mean, the peaches, unless they're really firm, peaches can get really soft, especially once they're tossed in their sugar component. But what you can do is build the galette, which is what I did with the one I baked. I built it, assembled it all, and then I threw it into the freezer, and then I just held it there until I was ready to throw it into the oven.
Mm-hmm.
So, because otherwise, like any fruit and sugar, it'll just macerate and get soft.
Another thing I often wonder when I'm baking with fruit is the sugar content in the recipe. Like, do you often adjust it depending on what your fruit tastes like? And how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, to be honest, it's a guessing game, I think. But if I see something that calls for a certain amount of fruit, and I know that the strawberries are really sweet, I mean, you definitely want to taste your fruit and mean, you can use the full amount of sugar that your recipe calls for, but it's good to taste your fruit so that you can adjust the flavor, and you can always back off. If it were me, I would probably like back off like 10% of the sugar or even 20% of the sugar, depending on how sweet the fruit tastes.
And does backing off on the sugar impact the bake in some other way?
No, not really. Not really. Not in this sense. If you were making jam and if you backed up a whole lot of sugar, then it would definitely change the way it jams up. But for this purpose, I don't think it would make a huge difference. That's a good question. So I've got it all cut up, and now what I'm going to do is, in the recipe, it calls for cornstarch, sugar, lime zest, and coarse coriander. And that's all mixed in here. I don't know if you guys can see that very well, but it's all already pre-mixed. And I'm just going to toss my fruit in this sugar mixture. And again, I'm not going to...
I was just going to say, it sounds like a delightful flavor combination. How did you come up with it?
It's something that we used to do in Nopa. Well, we would use coriander in some of like the fruit desserts, and I figured coriander, cilantro, they're the same family, and lime zest. I wanted to, play around with Mexican-inspired flavors. So I didn't add all of my sugar because I think that's well coated, and I don't want it to get too juicy. Then your galette can get too weepy, I guess you could say.
Do you have a thickener in there as well?
Yes. So the cornstarch.
Oh, the cornstarch.
Is in there, and then I'm going to add some lime juice just to get it all together. So it's about half a lime, but you can, a lot of the times it's to taste. Recipe might say use a full juice of one lime, and you're like, that's too much. So I can feel it right now that it's like thick enough. I don't want to add any more, or also just get too wet and runny. It smells so
amazing.
Yeah, it smells so good. I love the lime zest in this galette. So I'm going to shift back to my pie dough.
So you said you use cornstarch.
Yes.
Is there a reason why that is your go-to thickener?
Not really. You could use flour if you wanted. I think cornstarch and any sort of flour would create a nice slurry, for the fruit. But no, there's no specific reason. So I'm just gonna build the galette now. And I'm going super rustic. I'm just dumping it all in the center, and I can kind of arrange it as I go, making sure. You could get really organized with this fruit and, arrange it in a way where it's all laid out in a nice like spiral. But I like keeping things fun and rustic and not giving myself a headache over how perfect it has to look.
You're piling it pretty high.
Yeah. The fruit will shrink. The fruit will shrink down in the bake, so it's okay if it goes up high. And then I have a little bit of slurry in there. I'm going to hold off until I fold it up. So at this point with the galette, I can just start to fold the pie dough. in these overlapping layers, like so. Now that I've got my nice little sort of bucket, I can add the juice. Make it all caught in the center. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, this is so educational for me. I'm now learning that I never stuff my galettes enough.
Yeah, this recipe calls for about 2 pounds of stone fruit, and when I first saw how big it was, I was kind of also surprised, but it can handle it, and the fruit will cook down and shrink in the bake. So, especially because like the peaches are so fleshy, and same with the pluots and the plums. They'll shrink down.
I also noticed you didn't peel your fruit.
No. Yeah.
Tell me about that decision.
I like to keep it simple. Keep it simple. And for this, I don't think it needs it. The flesh is so soft that once it cooks, you don't really. It just kind of melts away in the bake. So yeah, you won't really be biting into like thick skin. None of these fruits are very thick skinned. If they were, then maybe.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, are there any fruits you work with where you definitely do choose to peel them?
I think apples, apples definitely have there's definitely tarts that leave the flesh on, but some apples have a thicker skin, and you'll see that in a lot of apple pies and stuff that you have to peel it. So you could just get the pure flesh. Yeah. And so this would go. So what I would do with this guy right now is it would go straight into the freezer, and get everything really chilled back up and cold, so that when it goes into the oven, those bits of butter in the dough kind of have their moment of sort of beauty where they puff up and melt and create all those flaky layers that we like to see in pie doughs. Otherwise you wouldn't have as a flaky, tender pie crust.
So how long do you like to keep it in the freezer?
For instance, for today, I kept it in for at least half an hour. But ideally, like an hour would be a good amount of sort of freeze time, and you could hold that in the freezer for a couple of days.
And then do you use like an egg wash or anything like that?
Yes. Thank you. You could use egg wash. I decided to have cream, heavy cream. So it's just straight up heavy cream. Heavy cream won't brown as dark as egg wash would, but I like the color. And if you were doing this out of the freezer, the heavy cream tends to set real fast on the cold dough. So if you're adding sugar to your dough, you have to work fast. But right now, since my dough is still soft and warm, everything will stick. Otherwise, if this was straight out of the freezer, this would be freezing and setting. Here I have more of this coarse sugar with coriander, and there's some Maldon salt in there. And I'm just going to sprinkle this all around. I like to have salt in my desserts, so I'll always add salt to my chocolate chip cookies, or I'll bump up the salt flavor in any recipe that I'm playing with, just because I like salt. Yeah.
I feel like that's often, I don't know if I would call it a secret, but like the delicious pastries and cookies and things that we buy from people like you often have a lot more salt than maybe we would do ourselves at home.
Yeah, salt is one of those things that balances out flavors, and it helps bring those sweet flavors to the front of our palates. So I think it's really important to um, to salt things properly. Maybe not too much, but definitely enough so that I like for flavors to sort of dance around in my mouth. And adding salt to any of your baked goods or even food in general will create that sort of magic in your mouth so that you keep your mouth guessing a little bit.
And do you usually use Malden?
If I use Malden for sort of last flourishes, or kosher salt is actually diamond kosher salt is my go-to for regular uses, but it's good on top of things as well.
Mm-hmm. I forget who it was who wrote a story, and I forget where. This is not helpful, but there was a story that came out a while back about how in most cookbooks, the salt used for testing the recipes is diamond crystal kosher salt, but it never says the brand of the salt, and different kosher salt brands have different saltiness, and it can dramatically throw off the flavor of the dish. And it kind of blew my mind. And now I just use diamond crystal, knowing that that's what most cookbooks use.
Most cooks use diamond crystal. I learned that early on back in the 2000s. I was an avid Martha Stewart fan, and she always had the kosher salt. So it's good to pay attention when chefs or celebrity cooks actually show which brands they're using, and I think it's just good to pay attention to those details.
Yeah.
I think Morton's salt is saltier. Morton's kosher salt is saltier.
It's much saltier. I learned that the hard way. So are there any other steps before you put that in the oven?
No. So, well, I've made a cajeta, and that's just for drizzling on top of the finished galette or serving with alongside. I have it over here. Cajeta is a caramel, but it's based off of goat milk and sugar. And it's got this sort of, some people don't like goat cheese, but I think cajeta has a completely different flavor profile. It's a little funky, but it's not funky the way goat cheese is funky. So don't be scared of cajeta if you don't like goat cheese. It's really delicious. It's similar, I would say, to dulce de leche, but it has a flavor profile that hits the back of your mouth, and I don't know, it's something I grew up eating on toast, and I love to make it. It's like, I think it's liquid gold. It's so good. It smells so good. It's nutty.
So if someone wanted to copy you and make this dessert at home this weekend, is it easy to find cajeta at certain stores?
I would say you can find it in a store that has a good Mexican ingredient or like section. There's a brand called Coronado, I think, that sells cajeta. If you're in the Bay Area and there's a local, like Hispanic or Latin supermarket, they definitely will have cajeta. I think it's harder to find in other stores. Some Safeways might have it, but I don't think all supermarkets would have it.
Sure. Well, we're lucky to have so many Latin markets in the Bay Area.
Yeah, we're lucky. You could always buy it on Amazon, I bet, or online in some way, but you can also make it. You can buy goat milk and cook it down with the sugar. I've included the recipe for that. in my recipe over here.
Wonderful. Is it harder or less scary than making normal caramel, or is it about the same?
No, it's different. It's different because you don't have to, with regular caramel, you're burning sugar, and it's hot sugar is so scary. I mean, it can be scary, but it's not, But the idea of cooking sugar and then adding that hot cream and then it kind of bubbles up and that can be intimidating. But cajeta is actually you heat up the goat milk with the sugar and you just continue to cook it for about an hour and it just slowly reduces into this like really luscious sort of ribbony caramel. It's not intimidating. It just takes time and a lot of stirring so you don't burn it.
Good to know.
Yeah.
So can we see the final galette?
Let me grab it.
And we're going to leave the last several minutes for questions. So if anyone has any, feel free to drop them in now.
All right, you ready?
Yes. Oh, it looks perfect. It's also amazing that you didn't arrange the fruit more because it looks so good.
Yeah, it doesn't need to. I think the fruit, the colors, the shape, it doesn't. The fruit's so gorgeous on its own. You don't need to play with it too much to let it shine. But I can leave it there.
So I want to go over all the different places where people can find your pastries.
Yes.
So we mentioned the Tuesday Ferry Plaza Farmers Market.
Yes.
And the Thursday Mission Community Market. But there's more, right?
There's more, yeah. So right now, Nopolito carries 2 of the pastries throughout the entire week. So Tuesday through Sunday at both locations, Nopolito on Broderick and Nopolito here on 18th Street, they sell conchas and Garibaldi's. And the flavor changes weekly on both pastries. So for instance, this week it's strawberry conchas and stone fruit Garibaldi's. That's one location. Grand Coffee on Sundays also carries some conchas and pick up some pastries there as well. Some like whatever my boxes for that week, people can pick up on Sundays at Grand Coffee in the Mission. And then more recently, Tahona Mercado in Nob Hill is also carrying some items. It changes from week to week there. Mm-hmm.
And the pastry boxes, can you share more about what that looks like?
Yeah, so the pastry box is a box, and it changes every week. The menu changes, but regularly it will feature whatever concha is available throughout the week. So this week it's a strawberry concha. It'll also have the Alegría granola and the Abuelita chocolate chip cookies. Those are the 3 mainstays. And then there's like the rotating sort of specialty items. So like this week it's a pink pearl cinnamon roll with cajeta. And then the other item is, what is the other item? I'm blanking on my other item. But last week I featured these little puff pastry batons that are called banderillas. And they're just like these large, they look like batons, but they're puff pastry. Little sticks, they're really crunchy and snappy. I'm just gonna plug in myself so I don't lose anyone.
Oh, yes, please do that. Someone asked about where to find the recipe, and that will be emailed to you if you signed up for this demo. Otherwise, I think we're going to be posting it on the event page on sfchronicle.com. So if you just happen to stumble upon this, you might be able to find it there. And then we have a great question from FK. As a professional baker, how do you keep the flavor of the products consistent?
the flavor of the product's consistent. In terms of like when I use fruit or with my base, well, with my base pastries, it's always, the concha recipe is always the same. The flavors just change on the topping. So you have your base recipes that you can always rely on, and those are those just stay constant. But then as far as when using seasonal fruit, like that's just going to vary from time to time. You know, you're focused on highlighting what's special about the fruit during that week or for that item. So there is no constant, because the fruit is always changing.
Right, and that seems like something that's really special about buying pastries from a baker like you is it's not the static thing that you can buy any time of year. It's the stone fruit galette with cajeta or one of the Garibaldis you make one week might be the best ever because of the fruit that happened to come out that week, and it might never be as good again. I'm just kidding. But
it'll just change. That's one of the things that's really inspiring about being at the farmers markets, is that, you know, sometimes you draw a blank on what to make next, but then you walk past the figs and it's like, wow, your mind kind of goes nuts with what could I do with this beautiful fig, or what could I do with this beautiful peach, you know, and it's going to change. So that's the beauty of the farmers markets, is that in California especially, we're so lucky to have such a variety and bounty of produce. Definitely go to your farmers markets to be inspired.
Yeah, is there fruit coming to the market soon that you're excited about or looking forward to?
I'm I haven't done anything with grapes yet, so I'm curious about grapes. I'm curious to see what I can do, because, you know, it's not something I think that's super common to have in Mexican sort of pastries, but I think I can play around with some ideas. Maybe we definitely have peanuts in our culture. So I don't know, maybe bringing both sides of my culture, Mexican and then being raised in the States, like peanut butter jelly.
Yeah, I mean, how would you incorporate grapes other than jelly? Is there any other way?
I mean, you can roast grapes. You can roast them and make compotes with them. So there's a couple of things you can do with grapes besides jelly, for sure.
Bree with CUESA is wondering about fall produce.
Fall produce, yeah. Asian pears are starting to come in, and lots of apples. I know Pink Pearl has a very short window, and those are in season right now. So if you haven't tried a Pink Pearl, definitely go, because they're going to be gone soon. All the different apple varieties will be coming through, and those are lovely as well. I like when quince comes into season as well. That's a really fun. In Mexico, it's membrillo, and you can make a quince paste essentially with it, and it's really delicious. That pairs well with like cheesy flavors like queso fresco, and so you can make all kinds of sort of pastries with that.
Quince is always cooked, right?
Yes. Yeah.
What would happen if I tried to eat one raw?
I think they're really astringent.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've never known. Yeah. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions, although many people are saying how beautiful the galette looks, which is absolutely true. So, yes, galette one more time.
Yeah.
How much cajeta would you drizzle on that?
I mean, this could be to taste. If it was me, I would probably do like a teaspoon, maybe a tablespoon per wedge.
Well, Raquel, thank you so much for showing us
thanks
how to bake with peak summer produce. And taking so much time to do every step. And I learned so much. I think we all learned so much and can't wait to bake. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here and to share my love of baking. And for me, it's all about community. And so I'm happy to be at the markets. So visit your markets for sure.
Awesome. And thank you, Bree and CUESA, for making this event possible. Thank you all for joining us on this beautiful Wednesday. And thank you especially to our Chronicle subscribers. The work we do across the newsroom would not be possible without your continued support. Have a good night.